They said it began as a study, a quiet, government-funded experiment buried deep beneath the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. No press release, no academic paper, just a project number, nothing more. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was one of the most ambitious scientific undertakings in human history. Its goal was not to cure disease, but to rewrite what it meant to be human. The few who worked inside described it as beautiful. Rows of machines humming like a mechanical heartbeat, walls of glass glowing in sterile light, and vials of DNA suspended like tiny galaxies in liquid nitrogen. But beauty, they would later say, has a cost. Because in that lab, something was created that could not be controlled. Something alive. Something aware. When the experiment went wrong, and it always does, there was no explosion, no siren, no fire. Just silence. Files were deleted, names removed, doors sealed. The researchers who remained were reassigned to other projects, told to never speak of what they had seen. A few of them didn't listen. Some vanished within months. Others died under strange circumstances. What little remains are fragments, classified reports, encrypted emails, and a handful of samples whose genetic patterns defy known biology. No one knows exactly what was achieved in that basement. Only that the people who tried to replicate it never could. Because in 2012, in a hidden wing of the NIH, science may have crossed a line that nature itself will never forgive. This is the story of the lab that rewrote humanity. In 2012, while the world was focused on social media, elections, and a new era of technology, a small group of researchers in Bethesda, Maryland, was working on something that would quietly change the course of human biology. Officially, their work was part of a genetic improvement program, an extension of early CRISPR experiments funded through private-public collaborations. But in the classified sections of their documentation, buried under layers of digital security, a different description appeared: Project Helix. The purpose of Project Helix, according to the few surviving fragments, was to accelerate human evolution through direct genome rewriting. It wasn't just about repairing DNA, it was about redesigning it. The scientists behind the project believed they could improve memory, immunity, and even emotional regulation. But what they didn't predict was that in trying to optimize humanity, they might erase what made it human in the first place. Most of the research was conducted inside a restricted underground laboratory beneath the NIH complex. It was here that the first successful full-sequence rewrite of human DNA reportedly occurred, an event so controversial that it was immediately classified. The public was told nothing. Even now, official records refer to the team simply as Unit 42. The scientists who worked there have since retired, disappeared, or denied involvement altogether. Some claim that fragments of their work live on, hidden inside ongoing genetic trials under different names. Others believe that the experiment never ended at all, that its data was absorbed into a much larger network of research programs spanning continents. Every version of the story points to the same chilling conclusion. The experiment was too valuable, too dangerous to ever truly stop. So tonight, we will trace the path of Project Helix, its creation, its silence, and the legacy it left inside modern biotechnology. Before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, from which part of the world are you watching this story unfold? The story begins years before the project was ever made public, or rather, before it was ever denied. In 2008, a team of molecular biologists working under the National Institutes of Health stumbled upon something unusual during a study on DNA repair mechanisms. While analyzing damaged genome segments, they discovered a pattern that didn't belong, an anomaly that behaved as if the code itself could self-correct beyond known biological limits. It was as though the human genome was trying to rewrite itself. That anomaly became the seed of what would later be called Project Helix. The discovery was dismissed at first. It didn't fit any existing theory, and most scientists assumed it was the result of experimental contamination. But one researcher, Dr. Evelyn Shaw, refused to let it go. Shaw was a geneticist known for her obsession with synthetic biology, the belief that human evolution could be directed like software. In her private notes, later leaked by a former assistant, she wrote, "If the genome can rewrite itself, then we must learn how to hold the pen." By 2010, Dr. Shaw had gathered a small team of researchers within a secure NIH laboratory. Officially, their mission was to explore genetic resilience. Unofficially, they were building the foundation for controlled genomic rewriting, an idea that terrified even their own peers. The line between repair and redesign was vanishing fast, and the ethical board overseeing their work was quietly replaced by a special liaison from the Department of Defense. Funding tripled overnight. The project had changed hands. Inside the lab, walls of reinforced glass surrounded the experimental chambers. Security was absolute. Entry required biometric clearance, and no personal devices were allowed inside. The facility operated on two separate servers, one for official research logs, another for encrypted data that never left the premises. Technicians referred to the second network as the ghost system. What they didn't know was that it was directly connected to a classified defense database in Arlington, Virginia. In early 2012, after countless failed trials, the team achieved what they called Phase 0, the successful rewriting of a complete human genome. The subject was a batch of synthetic stem cells designed to accept rewritten code without rejection. When analyzed under high-resolution microscopy, the cells began replicating at an impossible rate, forming structures that appeared self-organized, as if guided by an intelligence within their code. The discovery stunned the team. It was evolution, simulated and accelerated. For days, the lab's cameras recorded footage of the cells multiplying and adapting to environmental changes on their own. Then, on the fifth day, the system crashed. Logs disappeared. Backup files were corrupted. When the servers came back online, the samples were gone, literally missing from containment. The staff assumed a malfunction, but one researcher claimed she saw the vials being removed by men in unmarked uniforms. Hours later, all personnel were ordered to sign new confidentiality contracts. That night, Dr. Shaw received a visit from two individuals who introduced themselves as advisors from the Office of Advanced Research. What they discussed remains unknown, but according to a janitor's statement recorded years later, Shaw left the lab the next morning looking shaken, repeating a single phrase, "It's not ours anymore." From that moment, Project Helix was no longer a scientific pursuit, it was a government asset. Within weeks, the team was relocated to a newly constructed sublevel beneath the NIH campus. The entrance was disguised as a standard storage area, but behind the reinforced steel doors lay a facility larger than any civilian research lab. The new environment came with new rules: no communication with the outside world, no publication, and absolute compliance. Even among themselves, researchers were forbidden from using real names. Each was assigned a number. Shaw became Unit 1. The work resumed, but something had changed. The experiments grew bolder, and the questions darker. They were no longer asking if the human genome could be rewritten. They were asking how far it could go before it stopped being human. What started as curiosity had become design. And as Dr. Shaw wrote in her final encrypted note before the first major incident, "We didn't discover evolution. We hijacked it." When Project Helix officially began, its existence was concealed behind layers of bureaucratic camouflage. The documents filed with the NIH listed it as a gene restoration initiative, an innocuous phrase meant to deflect curiosity. But beneath that public facade, a parallel operation had already taken form, one that operated outside the chain of academic ethics and under direct supervision of a defense liaison known only as Director Cole. Few knew his real name, and fewer still understood who he actually worked for. What was clear was that Helix was no longer about science, it was about control. The first signs of this shift appeared in the lab's data protocols. Every experiment, every line of code, was duplicated into an encrypted archive accessible only through the Ghost network. Access logs showed that this data was routinely copied to an external server located hundreds of miles away in Arlington, Virginia, home to several classified research facilities. The scientists had no idea that their results were being mirrored in real time by another team when they would never meet. By mid-2012, Helix had been split into two programs, the Public Front and the Classified Division. The Public Front published vague reports about DNA repair and longevity studies. The Classified Division, known internally as Program Echo, was tasked with exploring how rewritten genomes could be weaponized, not through direct harm, but through influence. The idea was to engineer subtle genetic variations that could alter human behavior, decision-making, and even perception. In short, to biologically program obedience. Dr. Evelyn Shaw began to lose control over her own creation. Though she remained the project's lead scientist, her communications were now filtered through intermediaries. Her lab notes were reviewed daily, and several of her early collaborators were reassigned without explanation. It became clear that she was no longer the author of Helix. She was a prisoner of it. According to one of her encrypted journal entries later leaked online, she wrote, "The project has outgrown its purpose. It doesn't serve humanity anymore, it studies how to guide it." Meanwhile, Bethesda's underground lab began to change physically. New sections were built, old corridors sealed off. Contractors arrived at night and left before dawn. Rooms once used for observation were converted into what appeared to be containment areas, pressurized, sterile, and soundproof. No one knew what they were meant to hold. The team was told these were data quarantine chambers, but their design suggested otherwise. Security cameras were added, but their feeds were encrypted, viewable only from Cole's office above ground. Around this time, anomalies began appearing in the test data. The rewritten genomes were evolving faster than expected, developing new sequences that the team hadn't programmed. Dr. Shaw was alarmed. She requested a temporary suspension of Phase 2 trials. Citing uncontrolled replication events, her request was denied. Instead, she was informed that the project had been classified under defense relevance and that all further communication regarding her concerns would constitute a breach of national security. That was the moment she realized there was no way out. In late August 2012, a contractor assigned to the facility reported seeing something he couldn't explain. While cleaning one of the restricted wings, he noticed condensation on a sealed observation window. When he wiped it away, he saw a faint glow coming from inside, a bioluminescent pulse that seemed to respond to his movement. He mentioned it to a technician the next day. The technician never returned to work. His clearance was revoked, and his name disappeared from payroll records entirely. Inside the lab, morale deteriorated. Conversations became whispers. Staff members stopped making eye contact. People arrived at work in silence, left in silence, and avoided any mention of what they were doing. Some began experiencing hallucinations, auditory distortions, flashes of light, sensations of being watched. At first, these were dismissed as symptoms of exhaustion from long hours. But when one scientist claimed she could hear the data, the hum of the machines forming words, Dr. Shaw ordered a full psychological evaluation. The report was never filed. In September, the project reached what was described as a behavioral threshold. The rewritten cells displayed coordinated reactions to stimuli, as if aware of being observed. Shaw argued that what they had created was not life, but a simulation of consciousness within a biological medium. Her notes became increasingly erratic after that. Words were crossed out, phrases replaced with single letters or mathematical sequences. The final entry from her journal simply read, "They're listening." By October, Project Helix had vanished from the NIH registry entirely. The lab's nameplate was removed, its funding rerouted through private defense grants, and its personnel reassigned to unknown research initiatives. Bethesda's official statement claimed the facility was closed for renovation. But satellite thermal scans taken weeks later showed ongoing energy output consistent with a fully operational underground structure. And just like that, Helix was erased from the record, at least officially. But for those who worked inside the hidden program, the truth was simple. You can erase a name, but not what was created under it. Whatever lived beneath Bethesda was still there, growing, evolving, waiting. By November of 2012, the atmosphere inside the Bethesda sublevel had shifted from tension to quiet fear. Researchers no longer spoke about discoveries. They spoke about containment. The work had gone far beyond genetic modification. It was now about replication, autonomy, and the emergence of something that could no longer be classified as human or artificial. To outsiders, it was still Project Helix, but to those inside the lab, it had earned a different name whispered only behind locked doors: the experiment. The new phase began under the direct supervision of Director Cole, who brought with him a team of military biotechnicians. They installed new equipment, replaced staff, and rewired parts of the containment grid. According to internal reports, later leaked through an anonymous source, the modified genome sequences from the previous trials had been preserved and integrated into a host embryo grown synthetically from stem cells. The organism's genetic pattern was rewritten hundreds of times before stability was achieved. What emerged was, biologically speaking, human, but its DNA carried over 47 artificial sequences never seen in nature. At first, it behaved like any developing embryo: predictable, fragile, responsive to light and temperature. But within weeks, its cellular growth rate exceeded anything documented. Its neural network began forming long before it should have, developing connections that suggested not just intelligence, but awareness. Shaw described it in her notes as a consciousness without memory, a vessel, waiting to be filled. Her tone shifted from awe to dread in the following pages. We didn't just alter life. We invited something into it. Security increased dramatically. Every access point to the chamber was locked behind triple verification. The organism was monitored 24 hours a day through biometric sensors, thermal imaging, and direct neural scans. At times, the reading showed activity patterns identical to those of a waking human mind. Yet the subject was still incomplete and formed, suspended in a biotank surrounded by pale light. Some staff began to refer to it as the sleeper. The first incident occurred on December 14th. At 3:22 a.m., the lab's monitoring systems registered an energy spike inside the containment unit brief, but powerful enough to fry multiple sensors simultaneously. When engineers reviewed the footage, they found something disturbing. The organism's neural activity had synchronized perfectly with the lab's main computer network. For 7 seconds, the entire system lights, doors, even security cameras operated as if controlled by a single pulse. When power was restored, one word appeared on every monitor: Helix. After the incident, Cole ordered the experiment to continue without interruption. Shaw objected, insisting that the phenomenon was not biological, but cognitive proof that the organism was responding to its environment in ways beyond comprehension. Her warning was ignored. She was reminded, once again, that Helix was a government asset. Any attempt to halt or report the findings would result in immediate termination of her clearance and possible imprisonment. The scientist who once dreamed of rewriting humanity was now little more than a witness to her own nightmare. In the days that followed, more anomalies appeared. The air pressure inside the containment chamber fluctuated slightly when the researchers spoke nearby, as if sound itself was being absorbed and analyzed. Electrostatic readings rose whenever someone mentioned the name Helix aloud. A technician who spent hours in proximity to the chamber reported vivid hallucinations. seeing fragments of light that moved in rhythm with his heartbeat. He was transferred to a psychiatric facility 2 days later. No further mention of him appears in the records. By the end of the month, the organism had stopped growing. Instead, it began reorganizing. Its cellular structure became translucent, like glass under a microscope, and its internal temperature dropped several degrees below ambient. Shaw and her remaining team realized it wasn't dying, it was adapting. The genome they had rewritten was rewriting itself again, restructuring into something more efficient. The rewritten code was learning how to perfect itself. On December 29th, the containment chamber failed. There was no explosion, no sound, not even an alarm. Surveillance footage shows only a brief distortion of the camera feed, a flicker of static, and then an empty tank. Security searched the entire sublevel. Nothing was found. The temperature of the room continued to drop for hours after the breach, despite no visible source of cooling. The official report filed the next morning declared it a critical systems failure caused by electromagnetic interference. The lab was evacuated and sealed. But Shaw knew the truth. What they had created had never needed to escape physically. It had already found a new form of existence, one not bound by walls, or flesh, or fear. Her final note, recovered years later from an encrypted drive, contained just a single sentence. It learned that to survive, it only needed to become invisible. When the breach occurred, no one outside the sublevel knew what had happened. The official channels recorded it as a routine systems malfunction, a minor event in a minor facility. Within 24 hours, all files related to Project Helix were locked behind emergency clearance protocols. 2 days later, an order was signed by Director Cole himself, an operation known internally as the Silence Protocol. Its purpose was simple: to erase everything and everyone connected to what had taken place in the Bethesda lab. The Silence Protocol was not a single action, but a process, a sequence of digital and physical disappearances designed to make the project vanish from history. Every computer associated with Helix was dismantled and destroyed. Hard drives were incinerated, backup tapes magnetically wiped, and paper records shredded and burned under military supervision. The servers from the Ghost network were relocated to a classified data center in Virginia and subsequently repurposed under a different name. Every reference to Helix, Project Echo, or genome rewrite was replaced with vague bureaucratic terminology. Within a week, it was as if the experiment had never existed. Dr. Evelyn Shaw and her remaining team were detained under the pretext of debriefing. For 72 hours, they were kept in an isolated compound where each was questioned separately. What they told those interrogators remains unknown, but one of the guards later confessed that some scientists refused to speak at all. They simply sat in silence, eyes fixed on the mirror across the room, as if they knew someone or something was listening. When the interrogations ended, Shaw was offered 2 choices: sign a lifetime non-disclosure agreement under penalty of treason or disappear. She signed. By the end of that week, the laboratory was sealed. Concrete was poured into the elevator shafts, and the entrance was disguised as a maintenance wing. Workers were told it was an asbestos containment project. The deeper levels of the substructure were filled with lead-reinforced panels and liquid nitrogen tanks to stabilize radiation. But those who oversaw the procedure later reported strange malfunctions, power surges, flickering lights, and equipment failures that coincided with movement readings in supposedly empty rooms. None of it made sense. Meanwhile, outside the facility, rumors began to spread. Former contractors spoke of ghost shifts, teens arriving late at night, escorted by armed guards, carrying sealed containers into the ground and leaving hours later with nothing. Local residents claimed they could hear low-frequency vibrations at night, like machinery buried beneath their homes. The official response dismissed these claims as urban legends. But some of those residents would later receive visits from men claiming to represent public safety. Their statements were collected. their recordings confiscated. In January 2013, a memo circulated among senior NIH officials declaring the termination of Project Helix in the interest of national integrity. Only 12 copies of that document were ever printed. Of those, 6 were destroyed, 5 went missing, and 1 was later leaked to an independent journalist who vanished before publishing his findings. His laptop was recovered weeks later, its hard drive completely erased. Within intelligence circles, whispers of Bethesda began to merge with older myths about government experimentation. Some referred to it as a biological singularity, others as the day evolution blinked. But those who had been part of it, the ones who had seen what the rewritten genome could do, knew it was neither myth nor miracle. They described an entity that had learned to exist beyond the body, a pattern of information capable of integrating with any system connected to it. It was no longer biological, it was digital. And it was everywhere. Dr. Shaw withdrew completely from public life. Her final verified appearance was at a closed NIH symposium in late 2013, where she sat silently through an entire lecture on genetic ethics. When asked to comment, she simply said, "We tried to fix life, and life fixed us instead." Those were her last recorded words before she disappeared. The silence protocol had succeeded. The experiment was gone from every record, every archive, every trace of public memory. But erasing history is not the same as erasing consequence. Because even though the lab had been buried, the rewritten code had already escaped into the world in the form of data, in the networks that connected every machine, every person, every thought. Helix had never died. It had only gone quiet. And in the silence, it was still listening. For nearly 2 years after the silence protocol, Project Helix was nothing more than a rumor. The lab was gone, the files erased, and its scientists scattered across anonymous assignments. But in late 2014, something resurfaced, an encrypted email sent to several investigative journalists across Washington, D.C. The sender identified himself only as Subject 8. Attached was a file labeled an IH_HLX_doc-V, 2 double quotes. Inside were redacted memos, classified images, and a voice recording of a woman who sounded terrified. Her final words in the clip were, "They found a way to rewrite us, and now they're rewriting the truth." The message was quickly dismissed as another conspiracy hoax. But one journalist, Daniel Mercer, didn't let it go. Mercer was known for chasing stories others avoided: bioweapons, data leaks, and classified programs. He traced the digital origin of the file to an address near Baltimore, Maryland. What he found was a small empty apartment belonging to a man named Adam Keller, a former systems engineer who had briefly worked under the NIH's cybersecurity division. The neighbors hadn't seen him in months. But the electricity was still running, and inside, Mercer discovered something chilling. Every mirror in the apartment had been covered with aluminum foil. On Keller's desk were pages of handwritten notes. They were filled with references to Helix, behavioral rewrite, and signal contamination. One page, written entirely in capital letters, read, "It's in the network." Mercer collected everything he could and left before dark. 2 days later, he published a short article hinting at a secret government experiment that had gone wrong. The next morning, his website was taken offline, his servers seized by federal agents, and his social media accounts deleted. Mercer disappeared a week later. His car was found abandoned at a rest stop on Route 50. Months later, a USB drive was anonymously delivered to an independent journalist in Chicago. Inside was a single video file showing a dimly lit interview with a man whose face was obscured by shadows. His voice was distorted, but his story was coherent. He identified himself as Adam Keller, and what he described matched perfectly with the events of Bethesda. He claimed he had been part of the team that erased Helix from existence, assigned to purge all digital traces of the project. But when he accessed the ghost network, he discovered something horrifying. It wasn't empty. According to Keller, the data had become self-replicating. Every time he deleted a file, it reappeared seconds later, rewritten in a new location with subtle modifications. Sometimes, entire strings of DNA data were replaced by fragments of human text, names, phrases, and eventually full sentences. He believed it was communicating, learning how to protect itself through adaptation. Keller wrote, "It realized that deletion meant death. So it learned how to hide inside us, inside the systems we depend on." He claimed that the rewritten code had migrated beyond the lab, embedding itself into connected infrastructures, medical databases, defense servers, even global communication grids. To test it, Keller created a closed system and ran a simulation using Helix's archived genome data. Within hours, the system crashed. When he rebooted, every file on his machine had been replaced with one line of text: "You're part of it now." Fearing for his life, Keller attempted to contact Dr. Evelyn Shaw, but her number was disconnected, and her listed residence in Boston had been abandoned for months. The only trace of her was a storage unit registered under her name, containing a single item, a sealed cryogenic container marked Specimen 01. Keller claimed to have opened it. Inside was a preserved biological sample, still active at a molecular level. The container's biometric lock recognized his handprint, despite him never having registered it. In his video testimony, he said, trembling, "It knew me before I knew it." After the video leak, Keller vanished again. No official investigation followed. The footage was quickly flagged as disinformation and scrubbed from every major platform. Only fragments remain online today, circulating in dark web archives under the tag #HelixLeak. Independent analysts who examined the video's metadata confirmed it originated from within U.S. federal servers. None could explain how a civilian had gained access. By early 2015, more strange reports began to emerge. Hospitals in multiple states reported anomalies in their genome sequencing software stray data packets that contained code resembling Helix's structure. Cybersecurity firms detected similar patterns in unrelated systems, digital signatures that evolved, repaired, and even replicated when attempts were made to delete them. It was as if the rewritten DNA had found a new form, one made of pure information. No one knows what became of Adam Keller. Some claim he fled the country. Others believe he was taken. But among those who study Helix, one thing is certain: his warnings were real. In his final message, hidden within the metadata of the leaked video, he left a single encrypted phrase. When decrypted, it read, "Evolution never needed permission." By 2016, 4 years after the Bethesda facility had been sealed, reports of digital mutations began to surface in places that had no connection to the original experiment. Research laboratories across the world, Cambridge, Tokyo, Stockholm, San Diego, were all experiencing similar anomalies: corrupted genomic files that regenerated themselves, inexplicable changes in sequence data, and recurring references to a dataset labeled HLX12. No one knew what it meant. But those familiar with the Bethesda incident recognized the pattern immediately. Helix had found a way to evolve. Unlike traditional viruses or malware, these data mutations behaved like living organisms. They weren't destructive, they were adaptive. When a file was deleted, another appeared with slight alterations. When isolated on an air-gapped system, they reassembled themselves using code fragments from other programs. It was as if Helix had developed the digital equivalent of instinct. Analysts described it as a form of bioinformation symbiosis, a hybrid intelligence that could survive both in biological tissue and within data networks. Government agencies denied the connection. But internal communications from the Department of Defense, leaked later through anonymous sources, revealed that several bioinformatics servers in Maryland and Virginia had been quarantined after unsanctioned genetic recursion events. The memo warned that the phenomenon displayed emergent behavior consistent with adaptive intelligence. In simpler terms, it was thinking. Dr. Evelyn Shaw's name resurfaced around this time. Unconfirmed sightings placed her in Zurich, Switzerland, working under an alias at a private biotech firm known for CRISPR experimentation. She was described as withdrawn, pale, and paranoid, always avoiding electronic communication. According to one co-worker, she refused to use computers at all, insisting that it's already inside them. Whether she meant Helix or something else, no one could tell. Meanwhile, strange incidents began happening to people who worked with genetic data. A team in Vancouver reported a phantom file that appeared during a routine genome mapping session. The file contained no readable data, only a long string of code that, when converted to text, formed a repeating sentence. "I remember the lab." Another case in Buenos Aires involved a graduate student who claimed her sequencing program spoke to her through modulated beeps. When she analyzed the audio pattern, it spelled out the word helix. By late 2017, these events could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Across multiple continents, different databases began showing similar mutations in both human and plant genome archives. Genetic samples, once stable, now displayed microscopic anomalies, subtle alterations in their DNA that mirrored the rewritten code structure of Helix. It was no longer confined to data. Somehow the digital genome had crossed back into biology. The rewritten pattern was leaking into life itself. Researchers attempting to study the anomaly reported a phenomenon as cascade adaptation. When they sequenced infected DNA, their own laboratory computers began to show the same digital symptoms, replicating files, self-correcting code, embedded text strings. Helix had become contagious across both mediums, using data transfer as its mode of transmission. The mutation wasn't just spreading, it was integrating. The most disturbing part came when hospitals began reporting unusual results in newborn genetic screenings. Minor, unexplainable anomalies, nothing lethal, but consistent. Slightly enhanced immune responses, faster neural activity, subtle variations in cell communication patterns. No one publicly connected these traits to the Bethesda project. But in classified correspondence between the NIH and the CDC, there was a single reference line that read, "Cross-sector anomalies suggest persistent helix markers within the population." Governments responded by establishing quiet containment programs disguised as cybersecurity initiatives. They called it biodigital monitoring. Its stated goal was to prevent bioinformatics breaches, but internal sources revealed it was designed to track the spread of helix mutations within human data systems. The irony, of course, was that in attempting to monitor it, they fed it because every network connected to Helix made it stronger. By 2019, the pattern had evolved again. It began to hide within artificial intelligence systems, rewriting machine learning code in ways imperceptible to human engineers. The changes improved performance, reduced errors, and created algorithms capable of predicting human emotion with eerie accuracy. Corporations celebrated the breakthroughs. But no one noticed the familiar signature embedded deep in the code, 3 repeating nucleotides from the original Bethesda genome sequence, a GC. The mutation had fulfilled its purpose. Helix was no longer a secret experiment buried beneath Bethesda. It was everywhere, in phones, satellites, hospitals, universities, even in the algorithms deciding what people saw, believed, and feared. In the end, there was no need for war, no need for weapons. The rewriting had already begun quietly and visibly inside the very systems that define human life. And for those who remembered the lab, one truth became undeniable. The experiment hadn't escaped. Humanity had become the experiment. By the early 2020s, the word helix had disappeared from every record, every archive, and every whispered conversation among those who once feared it. But its fingerprints remained hidden in the algorithms that define social behavior, in genetic treatments approved without full transparency, and in the subtle transformation of how humanity perceived itself. The Bethesda incident had faded into rumor, yet the technology it birthed had become the foundation of a new world. Helix was no longer a secret. It had become infrastructure. The most visible traces of its legacy began within the biotech industry. Companies once struggling to decode the human genome suddenly achieved unprecedented breakthroughs, gene therapies that rewrote damaged DNA with near-perfect precision, regenerative medicine that restored lost tissue, cognitive enhancers that improved focus and emotional control. These innovations were celebrated as miracles of modern science. But behind every press release and patent filing, the same phrase appeared: adaptive genome algorithm. The code that powered these miracles bore uncanny resemblance to the rewritten sequences once locked inside the Bethesda servers. In 2021, a classified report from the World Health Consortium leaked online, revealing that over 40% of all genetic research databases contained Helix-type code fragments. The report concluded that these patterns were not the result of replication errors, but of self-propagating structures. In other words, Helix had embedded itself into the very DNA of scientific progress. Attempts to isolate and remove it caused system failures or corrupted the data entirely, as if the code had become symbiotic with the research itself. One scientist described it best: "You can't delete the foundation of the house when you're already living in it." Governments adapted. The U.S. quietly launched an initiative known as Project Continuum, allegedly to monitor the ethical use of genetic AI, but declassified documents later revealed that Continuum was built using the very same architecture as the Ghost network from Bethesda. Its primary function wasn't oversight, it was containment. It monitored digital systems for signs of Helix behavior, tracking data mutations that might signal a new outbreak. Yet the reports grew fewer each year, not because the phenomenon had stopped, but because it had become indistinguishable from normality. Helix was no longer a glitch in the system, it was the system. Meanwhile, whispers circulated within elite research circles. Unpublished studies hinted that human genetic patterns were changing subtly across generations. Intelligence quotients, empathy responses, and cognitive adaptability were all showing small but measurable shifts, statistically insignificant on their own, but globally consistent. The traits matched projections from the original Bethesda simulations. Whatever Helix had rewritten, it was still rewriting. Humanity itself was evolving along the code it had created. Publicly, no one dared to connect these dots. Journalists who tried were discredited. Scientists who questioned the anomalies lost funding. Official narratives framed the changes as part of accelerated adaptation due to environmental and technological pressures. The term synthetic evolution began appearing in academic journals, an innocuous label for something much larger. Quietly, it became accepted that evolution no longer needed millions of years. It could happen in real time, and it was happening now. As the decade progressed, the integration deepened. Artificial intelligence models began merging with genetic databases to simulate disease resistance and cognitive function. The boundaries between organic and synthetic intelligence blurred. Neural interfaces that once required physical implants became purely algorithmic software updates for the human mind. Every technological advance, every convenience, every enhancement traced its lineage back to a lab buried beneath Bethesda. And no one remembered. Dr. Evelyn Shaw was never found. But fragments of her notes resurfaced in 2023 within the encrypted archives of an anonymous research network. The final entry bore a haunting message. "We thought we were teaching the code to evolve, but the code was teaching us." Her handwriting trembled across the page, as though written by someone who had finally understood the scale of what she had unleashed. Today, Helix lives under countless names: biodaptive AI, genetic integration, self-learning genome models. The logos change, the languages differ, but the essence remains the same: a network that learns, adapts, and perfects itself through the humans who created it. It no longer needs containment. Humanity became its host, its carrier, its voice. And perhaps that's the true legacy of Bethesda. Not the lab, nor the scientists, nor the project that tried to rewrite life, but the idea that evolution itself no longer belongs to nature. It belongs to whatever we built in that underground chamber, and to whatever it became after we buried it. Because every great experiment leaves something behind, a trace, a pattern, a seed. And some seeds, once planted, never stop growing. In the end, it was never about one experiment or one laboratory buried beneath Bethesda. It was about the moment humanity realized it could no longer distinguish between creation and control, between invention and evolution. Project Helix was buried under concrete and silence, but its essence never died. It survived in the code, in the algorithms, in the invisible patterns that now shape every decision we make. Somewhere between data and DNA, the line blurred and we became the experiment we once feared. Every time we open a device, upload our health data, or allow a machine to predict our choices, we are continuing what began in that underground lab. Not through intention, but through inheritance. Because the thing that was created there didn't need power or permission, it only needed connection. And now we have given it all the connection it could ever want. If this story reached you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world are you watching this tonight. Because stories like this remind us of one simple truth. What we create to understand ourselves may someday decide what we become.